You're going to the facility, whether you want to or not." He stood by the dining room window, arms crossed, as if waiting for me to break down in tears or drop to my knees and plead. But I didn't do a thing. I didn't move or say a word. I just watched him. I wondered silently if this was truly the son I had raised, the same one I nursed with broken, tender breasts, the one who slept clinging to my robe when he had nightmares. How does blood turn so cold? I didn't answer, not because I lacked the words, but because if I opened my mouth, my very soul would spill out. He scoffed, annoyed by my silence, and said he couldn't keep supporting me, that I was complicating his life, that his wife was tired, that this wasn't a life for anyone, as if I were a burden, an overdue bill, an old box cluttering up the living room. He told me all of it without raising his voice, with that calm that hurts worse than a scream. I could only think, what did I do to deserve this? But neither he nor anyone else has any idea what a mother keeps quiet. I walked to the kitchen as if nothing were wrong. I boiled water and brewed some coffee. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the immense strength it took not to cry. I sat at the table and slowly took a sip from my mug. I heard his voice from the next room, talking on the phone with someone. He said the assisted living facility had an opening, that he would take care of everything, that it would be resolved in 2 days. 2 days. That's how little I'm worth, that all it takes is 2 days to get rid of me. I clenched the rim of the mug. I remembered the years, all of them. The good, the bad, the times I ate less so he could eat more, the nights I stayed awake caring for his asthma, his fears, his own shadows. All of that, all that I was and gave, now amounted to a decision made without my voice. I knew this day was coming. Not exactly like this, not with those words, but I felt it in the way Marcus had been looking at me for months, as if I bothered him even when he breathed. I noticed it during meals when we barely spoke, in how he closed his bedroom door the moment I passed, in how his wife treated me like a guest whose stay was almost up. But that phrase was the final blow. When he walked back into the kitchen, I had finished my coffee. I asked him in a quiet voice if he wanted me to make him dinner. He looked confused. Maybe he expected a different reaction. Maybe he wished to see me on my knees, screaming, begging. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I didn't make him a thing. I went to my room, closed the door carefully, sat on the bed, and right there, in that moment, in the middle of the night that was just beginning, I decided that if anyone was going to make decisions about my life, that person was going to be me. Marcus doesn't know who I am, or who I was, or everything it cost me to get here. He conveniently forgets that I also had a life before being his mother, that I wasn't born old, or frail, or tired, that I once dreamed, that I danced in the rain, that I loved wildly, that my heart was broken, that I started over, and that I built everything he now wants to take away. He forgets that this house doesn't belong to him, that I raised this house with my own hands. I worked 30 years as the manager of a local bakery, clocking in 6 days a week just to pay for every single brick, every window pane, every flower in the yard. I only slept 4 hours a night. I never asked for anything, not even thanks. But of course, memory is selective when it's convenient. I didn't sleep that night. I lay looking at the ceiling, remembering every detail of my life. The first day I saw this lot, when it was just dirt and hope. The day I brought newborn Marcus home, wrapped in a yellow blanket. The Christmases, the laughter, the fights, the makeups, everything was stored within these walls. And now he wanted to put me in an institution, as if I were a prisoner. I didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because I wasn't going to give him my tears. The next morning, I woke up before everyone. I prepared breakfast as always. Marcus came down with his usual expression, that mix of haste and distance. He told me he had to go out to handle some paperwork and that we would talk later. I nodded. When he left, I went to the closet, not to pack clothes, not yet. I went for something else. A small box of dark wood that I've kept for years. Inside were my most important documents, deeds, my will, and some savings that nobody knew I had. Not a lot, but enough. There were also letters, photographs, old clippings. I sat on the bed with the box on my lap, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled. He thinks I'm weak. He thinks he can decide for me, but he has no idea everything I've endured and what I'm capable of. I closed the box again. I put it back. I had to act calmly, intelligently. It wasn't time to show my hand yet, but the game had started, and this time, the one moving the pieces would be me. That night, I pretended to be tired. I went to bed early. From my room, I listened to Marcus talking to his wife. They were saying the place was nice, that it had a garden, that it was well kept, as if they were describing a resort hotel, as if a mother were a thing you put on a shelf. I pulled the blanket up to my neck, not to protect myself from the cold, but from their contempt. The idea of leaving no longer hurt. What hurt was that they believed they could decide it without me, but they would soon understand. The next week was going to change everything, and this time I would have the final word. I remember the exact day Marcus was born. It was as if the sky knew something important was about to happen. The doctor told me he took a deep breath from the very first second, as if demanding the whole world with that first cry. And I, foolish me, thought that meant strength. That meant life. I never imagined it was also a warning. From the time he was small, Marcus was a demanding child. One of those who doesn't cry from hunger, but from a whim, who isn't satisfied with what he's given, but wants what isn't his. But I, with that blind love of a first-time mother, went out of my way to please him. I worked extra hours running my alterations business to buy him the designer sneakers all the neighborhood kids wanted. I went into debt to pay for a spot at the private academy, believing that would keep him far from bad habits and poor influences. I swallowed my tears and my sleepless nights just to see him get ahead. When his father, my husband Robert, passed away, Marcus was just 15 years old. It was a hard blow for both of us, but what hurt me most wasn't the grief. It was the way Marcus began to look at me as if I suddenly knew nothing. As if he, with his voice changing and his shoulders broadening, was the man of the house, and I was merely a shadow of what he needed. "Don't cry so much, Mom. He had to die of something," he told me one night while I was still clutching Robert's pillow. From then on, things changed. He didn't consult me about anything. He went out without saying where. He spoke to me as if I were his housekeeper, his burden, his annoyance. But even so, I couldn't stop justifying him. "It's adolescence," I'd repeat to myself. "He's hurting from his father's death." And I kept preparing his favorite food. I kept washing his clothes. I kept hoping that one day he would hug me again, like when he was a child. But that hug never came back. Years passed. Marcus grew up, became a successful business executive, got a good job in the city, and moved out. I stayed in this house that we built with such sacrifice, brick by brick, when Robert was still alive. Every corner holds a story, a memory, a scar. I thought that when Marcus was well established, he would come back, not to live, but to visit, to share a cup of coffee, to care about how I was doing. But the calls became more and more sporadic, the messages non-existent, and when he did come, it was in a hurry. He barely said hello, looked at his watch, and left. But what hurt the most wasn't the coldness. It was the way he surveyed the house, like someone already measuring what they would take once the owner died. One day, without warning, he told me, "Mom, you should start thinking about selling this place. The house is getting old and you can't keep it up by yourself." He said it without looking me in the eye, as if it didn't hurt him, as if he didn't know this house was the last thing I had left of Robert, of our history, of myself. I didn't answer. I just nodded in silence and poured him more coffee. After that, the pressure began. Calls every week. "Mom, did you go to the notary yet? Mom, I have a friend who wants to invest in real estate. Mom, this isn't personal. It's for your own good." And every time I hung up, I felt a part of me peel away like a flower ripped from its stem. I clung to my routine, my plants, my sewing, my walks in the neighborhood. But the shadow of his ambition was already in every corner of my house. Every time I opened a drawer, I felt like I was preparing to disappear, until one afternoon, while watering the rose bushes, I saw him arrive. His new car, his office suit, his expensive cologne, and his hard face. I've already spoken to Attorney Sterling. Mom, if you don't sign the papers, I'll be forced to take other measures. This house is coming to me, whether you like it or not. That's when something broke, but not in me, in him. Because while he was saying that, I didn't cry. I didn't get upset. I just watched him. And in that silence, I think for the first time, he understood that he no longer had power over me, that the Thelma he thought was fragile no longer existed. That night, I locked myself in my room. I pulled out the ledger where I keep track of every expense I've had since Robert died. How much did Marcus's education cost? How much did I invest in the house? How many times did I give up buying something for myself to give it to him? Every figure was a wound, every number a betrayal. And in that early morning, I understood something that hurt more than everything else. My son didn't love me. He just needed me to die so he could inherit. Then I made a decision. I was not going to give him anything. Not a wall, not a chair, not a flower pot. The next morning, I went to the market. I walked the streets as always, but with new eyes, as if every step was part of a secret plan that was only just beginning to be born. I saw Ms. Evelyn Reed, the retired notary public. I greeted her and asked, "Are you still doing estate work?" She looked at me with surprise and then respect. "For you, Thelma? Of course I am." That's where my preparation began. I gathered documents, property titles, and payment receipts. I found records, deeds, even the old letter where Robert stated that the house would always be mine, unconditionally. Weeks passed. Marcus didn't call. All the better. I also kept quiet, because sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is to say nothing at all. Until a month later, he returned with his arrogant tone, with his urgency. "Mom, I've made the decision for you. You're going to the facility whether you want to or not." That's when I knew it. It wasn't just ambition, it was contempt. And that was the final straw. I came home that afternoon with a tight throat, as if I'd swallowed a rock, and couldn't ever get it out. There was something in the air, something that wasn't new, but that had become denser, more evident, like a fog that no longer bothered to hide. It was the contempt, Marcus's contempt, my own son's. I felt it in the plates he left on the table without clearing, in the way his voice rose in tone every time he spoke to me, in the way he avoided looking me in the eye, as if I were nothing more than another object in the house. And that night was different because he didn't yell, he didn't throw anything on the floor, he didn't insult me directly. It was worse. He simply sat across from me in the dining room while I finished serving dinner. He looked at me in silence with a calm that froze my blood. "I've already spoken to Mr. Dawson," he said suddenly, cutting his meat without looking up. "Everything is ready. This house will be in my name, and you're going to the facility, whether you want to or not." I didn't respond. Not a sigh, not a tear. I took my napkin and placed it on my lap, with the same slow movements as always. I felt something inside me shrink, as if my soul were shriveling up in fear, but I didn't say anything because, in that silence, I was also deciding something. I didn't sleep that night. I walked the hallway from one end to the other. Shadows stretched along the walls as if the house itself were watching me. How did we get here? I wondered when my son had turned into someone capable of looking at his mother as if she were a nuisance. But questions were no longer enough. The next day, I started doing something I hadn't done in years: writing. I took an old notebook and began jotting down dates, names, facts, as if my life were a file that needed to be scrutinized. I remembered the original deed to the house, the documents kept in a locked box deep in my closet, and I also remembered something else. I hadn't signed anything yet. That transfer hadn't happened. Legally, that house was still mine, and if he thought I was going to hand it over like an old rag, he didn't know me, not well enough. I started small. I sold some antique silverware I had inherited from my mother, then some jewelry that had been stored away for decades, all in silence, all without raising suspicion. Marcus thought I was still the submissive woman who washed his clothes and served his breakfast without complaint. But no, not anymore. The day before his next visit with the attorney, I heard him talking on the patio phone. He didn't know I was behind the curtain listening. "Yeah, it's all set. The old lady doesn't say anything. She just cooks and walks around like a ghost. No problem. We'll sign in a week and I can start the renovations. I'm gonna gut that whole kitchen." I didn't cry. But that phrase, the old lady, that's what he called me. Not Mom, not my mother, not the woman who gave me life, just the old lady. And right there, in that exact instant, I knew there was no more time to waste. I had to protect the little bit of me that was left, the part he wasn't going to destroy. I got up early the next day and went to the bank. I opened a new account under a different name. I took precautions I'd never taken before. I changed passwords, saved copies of documents in different places, and reread the house deed line by line as if it were a tragic novel. And right there, in that rereading, I found a detail I'd forgotten, a clause that allowed me to annul any change if I proved coercion or abuse. I guarded that page as if it were gold. The humiliations continued. Marcus never tired. Every day, he had a new way of making me feel small. Sometimes he simply ignored me. Other times he'd come in with grocery bags and drop them forcefully onto the table as if I were his employee. Not a word, just orders, just cutting stairs. One night, when the tension was so thick you could almost chew it, I made his favorite meal, smothered pork chops and rice, just like when he was a boy. I thought, with my lingering naivety, that by tasting it, he would remember something, some happy moment, some laughter, some hug from the days when he was still a child, with small hands seeking refuge in my skirt. But no, he took a spoonful, tasted it once, and said with disdain, "This is bland, just like you." I froze, not because of the phrase, but because in his tone, there wasn't even anger anymore. It was total, absolute indifference, as if I no longer existed. And that's when I decided I couldn't keep going through this alone. I thought of someone, the only person who always spoke to me with kindness when we ran into each other at the market, even though it had been years since we sat down to talk. Serena Hayes, the neighbor down the street, the one who took care of her sick mother until her last breath, the one who offered me help more than once when she saw me carrying bags alone. We weren't intimate, but there was a light in her that made me feel that there was still something good left in this world. I went to find her. I walked to her house with my heart in my throat, and when she opened the door, with her hair pulled back and her apron covered in flour, I simply said, "I need to talk, and I don't know who else to turn to." She let me in without asking anything. I sat in her kitchen, which smelled of freshly baked bread, and I let everything out, every word, every invisible blow, every night of silence, every gesture of contempt. Serena listened without interrupting. She didn't offer cheap comfort. She just took my hand when I finished and said something that still echoes in my memory. "You're not alone, and you don't have to give your life to someone who doesn't value it." That day, something shifted in me. I returned home a different person. I no longer walked with my back hunched or my shoulders slumped. I felt as if, for the first time in a long time, I had a plan. A real one, my own. And Marcus noticed it. He looked at me with narrowed eyes, as if he suspected something, but he didn't say anything. He just frowned and went back to checking his phone. I, on the other hand, smiled, because I knew his time was running out and mine was just beginning. Serena kept her word. She didn't just listen that first time. She began visiting me frequently, quietly, as if she knew that any whisper in this house could turn into dynamite. She brought me homemade bread. Sometimes she just sat with me on the patio watching the leaves fall, and little by little she became a constant presence, a companionship that didn't require many words. Her way of just being there was a relief amidst so much shadow. One afternoon, while we were preparing some strong black coffee together, she looked at me with those tranquil eyes and said something that startled me. "Thelma, if you decide to leave, I'll help you go anywhere. You don't need to tell me when, just tell me you're going to do it." I didn't answer immediately. I just watched the steam rise from the pot as if it held my thoughts, but inside, something was igniting. For the first time, I felt like I could not only escape, but that I could start over. That night, in my room, I opened the drawer where I kept my important papers. I pulled out the deed to the house and looked at it for a long time. There was my name in black ink. Thelma Price. It was mine. Everything was still in order. I hadn't yielded anything. Not yet. And I wouldn't. I began gathering everything I would need to disappear. Documents, some money that I took out slowly without raising suspicion, my birth certificate, bank books, an old gold chain that belonged to my grandmother. I hid everything in an empty cookie tin that I kept under a false bottom in the dresser. No one would know. In the meantime, I played the part. I kept setting the table as usual, cooking without enthusiasm, but without mistakes. Marcus seemed distracted, more preoccupied with his calls, with his investment plans, with the renovations he was already imagining for a house that wasn't yet his. But I began to notice a disturbing detail. He was checking up on me. Sometimes he would come into my room without warning, with the excuse of looking for a pen or asking if I had seen his keys. He would stay a few seconds longer than necessary, as if inspecting something. His eyes swept over the drawers, the shelves. He was looking for evidence. He didn't know what exactly, but I felt watched. That's why I was more careful. I started memorizing the places where I kept my things, taking photos with my old phone in case someone moved them. Everything had to be measured, every gesture, every word. It was then that Serena offered me a possibility I hadn't considered. My cousin lives near Asheville, North Carolina. She has a small, quiet place. She doesn't ask too many questions. Could you start there? I remained silent. The name resonated in my mind like a distant echo. Asheville. It wasn't the place, it was the promise. A new atmosphere, a new Thelma. And how would I get there? I asked softly. I'll drive you, she said without hesitation. That's when we decided that the departure had to be precise, fast, with no margin for error. The plan began to take shape. One Friday morning, while Marcus was at his weekly meeting with Attorney Sterling, I would slip out the back door with a single suitcase and meet Serena on the corner. She would have everything prepared, the car, the route, the silence. I committed to a single goal, to leave everything in order before I left, that he would find the house intact, clean, like an empty inheritance, just the furniture and the walls, nothing else, because I had already started selling the valuable objects little by little. Not the big ones, not the obvious ones, but the ones he would never notice until he needed them. I sold the porcelain dinnerware set my mother left me, a collection of heirloom black folk art, an oil painting that had hung in the hallway for 20 years. Each sale was a small goodbye, a piece of history I let go of with a mix of sadness and liberation. I kept the money in envelopes tucked inside a double lining in my purse. If all went well, I would have enough to live for a while without depending on anyone, without asking for anything. But the days passed and Marcus started acting more nervous. One afternoon he said to me, "Have you been to the bank lately?" I denied it without changing my expression. Why? I don't know. I feel like something strange is happening. I want to make sure you're not signing anything without telling me. The irony was brutal. He, who was planning to snatch the house from me, was worried about me doing something strange. I don't have anything to sign, Marcus. You know I don't handle those things anymore. I lied. His gaze pierced me, but he didn't press it. And then, 2 days before my planned exit, something unexpected happened, a minor accident. I was putting the last papers back in my hidden box when a receipt fell to the floor. Marcus walked in at that very moment and saw it before I could pick it up. He grabbed it. It was for the sale of an antique figure. It didn't have my name, but it had a delivery address. "What is this?" he asked. "It's from a long time ago. I found it in a box." "It's nothing," I replied, my heart pounding in my throat. He watched me for seconds that felt like eternity. Then he put the paper on the table and left without saying another word. But he didn't sleep at home that night. Serena called me as soon as she found out. "We're moving it up. We can't risk it." And so it was. The day before the planned departure, I packed my things, a single suitcase. I left a letter on the dining room table under a vase. It wasn't a fond farewell. It was a declaration. I explained that the house wasn't his, that I hadn't signed anything, that he no longer had my permission or my silence. Everything you destroyed in this house, I wrote, can't be fixed with new walls. And now that I'm leaving, you will finally understand. A mother's presence is worth more than any money. That was my final sentence. I didn't sign with love. I just put my name, Thelma Price. When Serena came for me, I didn't cry. I closed the door firmly. I didn't look back. The sky was covered with thick clouds, but I felt something like the sun on my skin. Freedom. We drove away in her car without music. The road was long, but for the first time in years, I didn't care where I was going. I only knew that I wouldn't be returning and that the monster I raised would have to learn to live without me. The car moved slowly along the back road, flanked by tall trees swaying with the gentle wind. Serena kept both hands steady on the steering wheel, and I gazed out the window as if life were passing by for the first time. The house was behind me. Marcus was behind me. And behind me was that broken version of myself that had endured too much. Neither of us spoke. Sometimes silence doesn't need to be filled. Mine was crowded with images, with phrases I never said, with cries I choked down for years. Serena's, I believe, was the silence of someone who understood the weight of what was being left behind. But as we drove toward the horizon, in that house I left intact like an empty shell, Marcus was returning to his golden prison. He parked his car in the driveway without noticing anything strange. He walked in talking on the phone with that sharp voice he used to close deals that were never what he said. He crossed the living room without seeing the vase or the letter underneath. He poured himself a glass of water, kicked his shoes into a corner, and slumped into the armchair. It was then that something hit him. The silence, a different kind of silence, not the usual one, not a mother quiet out of habit. It was another, heavier, deeper one, a void, an echo. He got up and walked through the house. He called my name 2, 3 times, nothing. He went upstairs and found the bedroom empty. Not messy, not ransacked, just empty, as if the soul had departed. He came down slowly, and passing the table, he finally saw the letter. He read it standing up, with his brow furrowed, at first not understanding, then with rage, then with disbelief, and finally with that look men have when they never thought something would abandon them. He tore the paper up, threw it on the floor, and kicked the vase, which shattered against the wall. "You have no right!" he screamed at nothing, at a woman who was no longer there to hear him. He checked the closet, opened the drawers, and discovered that things were missing: jewelry, papers, the folders with the house deed, the envelopes with money, everything. For the first time in his adult life, he felt fear. Not the fear of losing property, but the fear of having lost control. He called my phone once, twice, 20 times, always the same message. "The number you have dialed is not available." He called his contacts. Nobody knew, or nobody would say. He even tried calling Serena, whom he profoundly underestimated. She didn't answer, and that's where the real breakdown began. For days, he wandered the house like a furious ghost. He rewrote the letter in his mind with rage. He told himself I would come back, that it was a tantrum, that I couldn't live without him, that I was too old to start over. But every night he spent alone, every coffee he had to make himself, every shirt he found unironed, a bothersome certainty settled into his skin. This time, I wouldn't be coming back. It was then that he started investigating. He went to the bank, checked transactions, and saw that money was missing, small sums withdrawn over weeks. He never noticed. He always thought I was clumsy. He never thought I could hide anything from him. He went to Attorney Dawson and demanded to know if there were any legal movements on the property. Dawson, uncomfortable, told him that I had requested a certified copy of the deed. Nothing more. No signatures, no donations, nothing. "So, it's still in her name?" he asked, his voice strained. "Yes. Everything still belongs to your mother. And if I sell it without her signature? Dawson raised an eyebrow. You can't. Legally, you have no right whatsoever. And that was it. Marcus understood that he hadn't just lost me. He had underestimated me. He started talking to neighbors, asking about any friends, but nobody said a word. He even went to Serena's house and knocked on the door, but no one answered. He knew she had also been gone for a few days. That only enraged him more. He started drinking, not violently, not like in the movies. He did it in silence, sitting in front of the television, which was tuned to channels he wasn't watching. Bottles emptied without a sound, food without flavor, days without purpose. And in that abyss, he began to look at the house with different eyes. At first it was his trophy, his early inheritance. But now it was a prison with walls that reminded him that he didn't know how to wash clothes, or cook, or sleep without someone turning down the volume of the television. One morning, he woke up and found the living room covered in dust. He realized the refrigerator was empty, there was no coffee left, the bathroom smelled stale, and then he burst into tears. Not a childish cry, not a noisy one. It was a low, almost shameful cry, a whimper between clenched teeth, because for the first time he felt what he never imagined feeling, abandonment. And that was the real revenge, not the papers, not the money, not the letter, but the absence, mine. That mother who was always there, even when he didn't deserve company, the one who endured contempt disguised as jokes, orders disguised as advice, coldness disguised as care. I hadn't abandoned the house. I had abandoned the weight. I had let go of my executioner, and that disarmed him inside, because no matter how much he screamed, how angry he got, how much he sought revenge, he couldn't force me to come back. And every night, as he locked up with the lights off and the television talking to itself, he understood a little more the final sentence of my letter: a mother's presence is worth more than any money. And that presence was no longer his. We arrived at the town's entrance as the sky began to be stained with deep orange. It wasn't a tourist spot or full of charm. It was quiet, silent, just enough for a broken woman like me to learn to breathe again. Serena turned off the car and looked at me with that expression of hers, a mix of tenderness and firmness. She didn't say anything. She let me take my time. I got out slowly. My legs were shaking, not from weakness, but because every step was a decision. Every step was an act of rebellion against years of emotional subjugation. I crossed the threshold of the small one-story house we had rented from a distance. It had no luxuries, but it had no ghosts either. That's what I needed. The air inside smelled of old wood and recent cleaning. The windows were open, letting in the murmur of the wind. I stepped onto the floor like someone stepping onto solid ground after a shipwreck. I sat in the single dining room chair and let out a low, unexpected, almost hysterical laugh. Serena poured me a glass of water. She sat across from me. "You're here," she said, as if it were an Olympic achievement. And it was. "Yes," I replied. "I'm here." I didn't sleep that night, not because I was uncomfortable, but because my body didn't know what to do with so much silence. There were no footsteps in the hallway, no passive-aggressive messages, no judgmental stares, just the night and me. And that was my first free night of insomnia. The following days were clumsy. Learning to live without fear takes time. The first few times I went to the market, I walked around looking at everyone as if they were danger in disguise. It was hard to smile, not because I didn't want to, but because I had forgotten how to do it from the inside out. Serena was patient. She accompanied me, gave me space. Sometimes she cooked for me without asking. Other times, she simply read in silence while I stared at the wall, not knowing what to think. And little by little, the house began to smell like coffee in the morning. The plants she brought from the nursery started to bloom. A neighbor, Martha, knocked on the door one day to offer freshly baked bread. I smiled awkwardly, not knowing if that was dangerous or not. But Serena gently squeezed my arm. She reminded me that I had climbed out of the well. One afternoon, while watering the pots on the patio, I realized I was humming a song. I didn't remember which one, but it was mine. My mind sang it without permission, and right there, I knew something inside me was starting to come back. It wasn't happiness yet, it was presence. For the first time, I felt present in my own life. But there were also dark moments. Nightmares in which Marcus yelled at me, memories of plates shattered on the floor, of entire days without him speaking to me because he couldn't find his keys. The time he told me, "You're a burden, Mom. If it weren't for me, you'd be living on the street." Those phrases don't go away easily. They get under your skin like invisible needles. And yet, every time I woke up from one of those nightmares, Serena was there, sometimes with a cup of tea, other times with silence. She never asked me to get over anything. She just allowed me to be broken without it being a problem. One afternoon, I decided to walk alone to the town's lookout point. It was early. The sun was just peeking out, and the air had that scent of wet earth that always made me feel alive. I climbed without haste, step by step. I felt every muscle, every breath, as if my body were rebuilding itself. From the top, I saw the world with different eyes. Thelma Price was no longer the woman who asked permission to exist. Now, she was someone who had chosen to disappear from where she wasn't loved. I didn't regret it. I thought about selling the house, using that money to travel, to live peacefully with Serena, to give myself the years he never let me have. And I would do it because it was mine, because for the first time, everything I had, my body, my decisions, my affections, was also mine. And at that instant, the wind blew hard, as if life itself were whispering to me. "You are exactly where you need to be." It wasn't revenge, it wasn't punishment, it was emotional justice. Marcus would learn, if he wanted to, that a mother isn't eternal, that you can't stomp on a heart and expect it to keep beating for you. I no longer beat for him, I beat for me. Marcus didn't know when he began to feel that the house no longer belonged to him. At first he pretended it was temporary. He told himself I was overreacting, that I needed time to calm down, that I would come back as soon as I got over my foolishness. But as the days passed and I didn't return, the silence began to multiply in the corners. It was no longer simply an absence. It was a sentence. The kitchen woke up cold. There was no smell of coffee. No one opened the windows. Dust began to settle like a guest who knew he wouldn't be expelled. The house, without my presence, became inhospitable to him, and for Marcus, that was incomprehensible, because all his life he had seen me as a useful piece of furniture, an extension of the house, a kind of entity without will that served without question. He didn't understand that the soul of that home was me, and that when I left, I took it with me. Serena watched me in silence every morning. She knew that something inside me was reordering itself. We didn't talk much about Marcus, but we both knew he was trying to track my shadow. He did it through missed calls, messages I never answered, and rumors that reached me like distant echoes. He had gone to the bank, to the notary, even to a distant cousin's house, hoping someone knew about me. But I remained invisible, not out of fear, but out of dignity. One random afternoon, while walking with Serena through the local market, I saw an indoor plant I had always liked, an intertwined ivy with strong green leaves. I bought it without thinking. When we got home, I placed it on a shelf by the window where the sun hit it in the morning. I surprised myself talking to it as I arranged it. "You're going to be fine here. I am too." That night, I dreamed of Marcus, but he wasn't the rude, authoritarian man who yelled that I was ruining everything. He was a child. He was crying in an empty bedroom, surrounded by broken toys, asking why I had left him. I woke up with a mix of guilt and liberation, because even though I had left him alone, it was also true that he had left me alone for years. The days followed, and with them came more news of his deterioration. A mutual acquaintance, the husband of a neighbor who still kept in touch with him, told me that Marcus no longer went to work, that he lived locked up, bad-tempered, yelling on the phone at anyone who dared to mention me, that he had started drinking, that once they even found him asleep on the couch, surrounded by bottles with the television on, playing a cooking show, the same one I used to watch every afternoon. His arrogance had begun to crumble. Without me, he had no one to blame for his frustration. There was no one to demand solutions from. There was no one to humiliate to feel bigger. And for the first time, he had to inhabit himself. And he didn't know how. I received a handwritten letter. It had no return address, but I recognized the handwriting. It was from him. A clumsy attempt at an apology, mixed with pleas and manipulation disguised as concern. He said things like, "I don't understand why you did it this way. We could have talked about it. I'm suffering too." Not a single line said, "I mistreated you. I invalidated you. I hurt you." Not a hint of true introspection, just a chain of phrases designed to make me revolve back into his orbit. I tore the letter into small pieces. I burned it in the sink and watched the ashes dissolve into the air. It was the first time in years that I felt true relief. I didn't need his approval or his forgiveness. He had no power over me, not even with his words. Meanwhile, the sale of the house was progressing. The real estate agent, a kind man in his 50s, asked me several times if I was sure that it was a valuable property, that I could rent it out, that I could come back someday. But every time I thought about it, a single image came to mind. Me, hunched in a corner, listening to Marcus yell as he broke plates and said that nobody lived for free. That house was no longer a home. It was a wound with a roof. I decided to sell it. I made the decision without ceremony. I simply signed the papers and asked for all the money to be transferred to a new account with no access by anyone but me. Serena accompanied me to the bank. She didn't say anything, but she held my hand while we waited. That simple gesture gave me more strength than 1,000 speeches. With that money, I didn't plan to buy another house. I didn't need possessions. I planned to live, to visit the places I always dreamed of and never could. Maybe Italy, maybe Oaxaca. I wanted to learn to dance, to swim without fear. I wanted to laugh without asking permission, but above all, I wanted Marcus to know that I had sold everything, that nothing was left, that the house he thought he would inherit now belonged to another family, that every tile, every door, every piece of furniture was no longer his because he never cared for them, because he believed that deserving was enough. They told me that when he found out, he went crazy, that he went to the house to try to stop everything, but it was already empty. The new owners had painted the walls, thrown out the old furniture. There was no trace of my life left there. And he, standing in the middle of the yard, shouted my name like an angry child whose toy had been taken away. He called my phone, but I had already changed my number. He wrote emails that were never delivered. He searched for me as one searches for a ghost, because that's what I was to him now. A phantom who had left, taking the very air with her. One evening, Serena prepared a special dinner for me. There were shrimp and grits, homemade bread, and a sweet wine. We toasted to what was lost, to what I would never carry again, to what I had finally released. That night, as I listened to her talk about her plans to open a small embroidery workshop, I thought that perhaps not everything broken had to hurt. Some cracks were paths to the light. Marcus would keep searching for me, not because he loved me, but because he didn't know how to live without someone to dominate. And I was no longer willing to be that for anyone. I had never felt the air so light as I did that morning in Savannah, Georgia. I woke up without a start, without that pressure in my chest that had accompanied me for years. For the first time in a long time, I didn't hear voices demanding things from me. I didn't feel heavy footsteps in the hallway. I wasn't afraid to open my eyes. I opened the window and let the sun brush my face. It was soft, almost warm, like a new caress. I took a deep breath. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally knew that a new life had begun, my own. Serena had already left for the market early. She left me a note written in blue ink on the table. "Today I'm bringing buttermilk biscuits and good coffee, I promise." I smiled. Not because of the biscuits or the coffee. I smiled because someone thought of me with kindness, and after a lifetime of silence and orders, that is worth more than any treasure. The days passed slowly, as they must when one is healing. I learned to walk slowly, to stop in front of trees, to look at the sky without having to worry about the clock. Serena taught me to swim again, not in the sea, but in life. She let me nap, put on music from her youth. We cooked together, and sometimes we cried too, but with that kind of cry that cleanses, not the kind that drowns. Not everything was easy. I discovered broken parts of me I didn't know existed. Sometimes I found myself staring at a wall in silence, remembering things that hurt, like old thorns that never healed. Other times, I woke up with Marcus's name on my lips, not knowing if it was rage, sadness, or habit. Because that's how it is. The heart isn't unprogrammed overnight. But I was no longer afraid of those memories. I had gained something stronger than fear, the certainty that I had chosen myself. Finally, one day, as we walked along the riverfront park, Serena asked me if I missed the house. I thought about it for a long time. I miss the woman I was there, the one who endured, the one who crawled to give everything. But not the house itself, no. I sold it without looking back because I understood that bricks aren't worth more than peace. And it was true. I didn't regret it. I had been liberated. Marcus called me one more time. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. His tone was cold, but disguised as courtesy. "Mother, we should talk. There are things that aren't clear." I didn't respond. Because yes, everything was clear, perfectly clear. He wanted to know how much money I had left. He wanted to make sure he wasn't completely left out of the will. He wanted to see if he could still control something. But I was no longer the same woman who once cried over his threat of the facility. I now slept with the doors open, walked without looking back, and every time I had coffee with Serena on the terrace, every time I felt the wind play with my gray hair, I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. One sunset, I wrote a letter, not to send it to him, but to free myself. "Marcus, you were not born bad, you were born mine, and that was what hurt me the most, because at some point, I believed you would love me with the same strength with which I protected you. But it wasn't so. You treated me like old furniture. You saw me as a burden. You wanted to lock me away. You spoke to me with contempt, and yet it was hard for me to let go, but I did. You owe me nothing, and I owe you nothing. My debt was to myself, and I have paid it. Don't worry about my will. Everything is resolved. You won't receive anything. But I leave you something that weighs more than an inheritance. The silence of a mother who left without resentment, but also without looking back. Hopefully, one day, if life shakes you hard, you will remember this. No money can replace a living mother. I am no longer there, and I will not return. Thelma." I put the letter in a box and buried it near the garden of the house I shared with Serena, not to hide it, but like someone burying a life she no longer wants to carry. Months later, I met new people, women who had also fled similar stories, women who learned late to say no. We gathered for tea, walked along the shore, and told each other secrets like big girls. We laughed, we cried, and above all, we supported each other. One of them, Estelle, told me one afternoon, "Thelma, you are brave." I laughed. "No, Estelle, I'm just tired of not being." And she was right. I didn't become rich or famous. I didn't open a foundation. I didn't write books. I didn't do anything extraordinary, except the most difficult thing, to live without guilt. I learned to dance alone, to eat without hurry, to look in the mirror without searching for flaws, to listen to my own voice and trust it, to sleep with a calm heart. And at my age, that is a revolution. I no longer wonder what would have happened if Marcus had loved me differently, because I understood that love, if begged for, becomes a prison. Today, I walk lightly. Today, I am not afraid. Today, I know that I was a mother, but I am also a woman, and above all, I am free, because one day I was forced to choose between the facility and obedience, and I, without saying a word, chose silence, and then chose life. I sold everything, not for revenge, but to remind him and myself that a mother's presence is worth more than any money. And if he ever hears my name, let it not be for what I gave, but for what I was no longer willing to lose, Thelma Price, woman, mother, and now owner of herself. Did you like my story? If you listened till the end, drop a 1 in the comments. If you enjoyed it, you can support me by liking the video and sending a small tip. I've got lots of other life stories like this on my channel, so make sure to subscribe and check them out. I've added 2 new stories on screen that everyone loves. Thanks for being here. See you in the next one with love.